On this episode of Doing the Most, we're making Jack Keller's pineapple wine.
Homemade brews and various how-tos, everything from mead to roast, big creation, fermentation, inebriation, doing the most.
This pineapple wine video is part of our series on Jack Keller's home winemaking book, and we're making 12 wines from that book. Big shout out goes to Jack Keller for being just the OG of home winemaking and having published the book, and also having published his blog for over a decade with all of his home winemaking secrets. We really miss you, Jack. Also a big shout out to Homebrew Ohio. They sponsored this series by providing some of the gear and equipment for us to make Jack's wines. Thanks to Homebrew Ohio, and there are links in the description to where you can pick up any of the gear or equipment you see in this video that you may need for your homebrewing arsenal. I have made pineapple wine, I have made tepache, I have made pineapple mead, I have brewed pineapple kind of any which way. And so I'm really excited to see how this very bare bones pineapple recipe turns out, especially because it uses canned pineapple, which I thought was very weird when I first saw it. One of the advantages of that is it's pineapple with the juice, and when you go to transfer it to secondary, you actually get pretty close to a 1 gallon volume in secondary. Whereas with a lot of Jack's wine recipes, you don't. You end up with maybe a half a gallon or 2/3 of a gallon because of the fruit load. And so on this recipe, unlike others in this series, I would definitely recommend to brew it exactly by the book as Jack recommends. This made like 8 or 9 bottles of wine, and as you can see, it's beautifully crystal clear. So let's take a look at the ingredients list for this wine. The ingredients for Jack Keller's pineapple wine are 2 20-ounce cans of Dole crushed pineapple in 100% pineapple juice, 1 can, or 12 ounces, of 100% white grape juice concentrate, 1 pound and 4 ounces of sugar, and water to make 1 gallon. We will also be using 1 teaspoon of pectic enzyme, 8 grams of tartaric acid, 1 teaspoon of yeast nutrient, and Lalvin's EC 1118 yeast. One thing to note, it recommends that little amount of tartaric acid, and there are kind of some instructions around balancing with that acid. We went ahead and just threw it all in, and that way we know exactly how it impacts the wine. And so we'll see when we get to testing what I think about the acid balance on that, and we'll have some notes about what we might do differently next time. But first, let's take a look at how this wine is made. As with most Jack Keller wines, we begin by heating up some water. Here I'm putting in 1 quart of water, and we're just going to bring it to a boil. Make sure to get everything sanitized before we get started, including sanitizing our cans of pineapple. We want to make sure nothing from the can gets into our brew. Then we'll get those opened up, and we're going to pour all the contents through a muslin straining bag. So the fruit pulp will get caught in the straining bag and all the juice will just filter right on through. This way we don't have a bunch of fruit floating around in here, and we can easily pull out the fruit before fermentation finishes. Once everything's in there, we'll get it tied off and leave that in the bottom. And then we're going to add our tartaric acid and our yeast nutrient. Here we're using diammonium phosphate for our yeast nutrient. And then we're going to toss in our white grape juice concentrate. Now, at this time, the supply chain didn't afford me any white grape juice concentrate in cans, so I had to make my own by reducing down some white grape juice very slowly until I had it to about 30% of its original volume. Then I bottled it up and used it for these Jack Keller videos where needed. So that cold concentrate goes right on top of that, and then we're going to mix our water and our sugar together to get the sugar perfectly dissolved. Very carefully, we will add that hot water to our sugar. Then we'll give that a quick stir until all the sugar is dissolved, and then the sugar will get poured on top of our pineapples. And then we'll just top up with water until we get to about 1 gallon. So once that's down quite a bit closer to room temperature, we're going to add our pectic enzyme. We don't want to add the pectic enzyme too hot and denature it. And then we're also going to add our yeast. And the yeast just goes in dry right on top. Then we'll cover that with a lid and let it ferment until it gets to 1.020 on the hydrometer. When that does get to 1.020, we're going to remove the fruit. So that just involves gloving up and removing the fruit bag, making sure to press out all the remaining wine that's in that bag before you discard it to your compost heap. Then we'll seal it up and let it finish fermentation. Once fermentation is done, we'll get it transferred off into a clean and sanitized carboy. And in this case, I'm going to cold crash it, so I just put it in my wine fridge and left it for a week or two. Once that had cleared up, we got it into bottles. All right, now you've seen how it's made. Let's see how it tastes. One cool thing about this wine is I was looking at the recipe earlier and it recommends drinking it at 11 months. And wouldn't you know, we are 11 months from the time that this was brewed. So we are tasting this right on time. That is a nice like straw, almost amber, but more in that like straw kind of gold. And it smells like pineapple. It smells like fermented pineapple. It's a little buttery on the nose, like in a way that you could convince me that there was some malolactic fermentation in here, though I doubt there was. But it is buttery. Interesting. It a little bit smells like a pina colada. And I know there shouldn't be like a coconutty note in there, but it's very tropical. Now, that said, it is kind of a one note. It a little bit smells like, back in the 90s, they had those tropical scented like sunscreens or like tanning oils. It smells a little bit like that. All right, let's get in there. Dry. So, good time to point out, we're tasting all of Jack's recipes bone dry because I didn't want to back sweeten any of them because I wanted kind of a consistent standard by which we're measuring how we feel about Jack Keller's wines. And in some of these, particularly pineapple, where you expect a sweetness, going in for that first drink and having it hit really dry can be kind of shocking. But I think it's important to taste all of these dry so that way we can have an understanding of what it's like before being balanced with any sweetness. There's no butteriness in the flavor profile. There's a little bit of a smoothness, though, that kind of hits at the back of the tongue. It's all pineapple, but it's not like a big, juicy, fresh pineapple. It definitely has that kind of tepache, fermented pineapple flavor. It's sharp. And the acid, I actually think the acid is kind of perfect on it. But I would want this sweeter if I was going to be bottling this to share or serve with folks, because I think just a little bit of sweetness would help balance out the acidity. It's interesting. It's not like my favorite thing that I've made from Jack's book so far, but the pineapple really does cut through. I think there are some interesting fundamentals we can learn from using the canned pineapple, and I don't know that I would necessarily argue it's the perfect ingredient for a wine. I would probably still stick to fresh but overripe pineapple fruit, not the canned stuff. But you could convince me that some canned pineapple in secondary on some kind of tropical themed beer could be kind of nice. Maybe an IPA or something where you do a little canned pineapple in secondary. Because it's punchy and fruity, and it's got some zing to it that I don't hate, but I don't think that I would pour a glass of this and just like have it with dinner, you know, sit down with some pineapple wine and the eggplant parmesan or something. It's definitely better than the sweet potato wine. You should check that video out. I don't dislike it. I don't love it. I think I would stick to fresh pineapple, but I do like the acid balance on it. I like that it's nice and tart and just a little bit puckery. It reminds me of like a Vino Verde, where the grapes are pressed kind of young and the wine is drunk kind of young, and so it's just a very verdant and green kind of flavor. You get that in this wine, but I probably wouldn't make it again. I'm curious, have you made pineapple wine? If so, what are your tips and tricks? Drop a comment and let me know. And if you enjoyed this video in this series, I hope you'll subscribe if you haven't subscribed to the channel already. And of course, you can follow us on Instagram, join our Discord community, and become part of the Doing the Most family. Until next time, thanks, Jack. Happy brewing, and cheers.